So, as far as the final exam, this will totally be a discussion about fallacies. And, let's just start with here. There's three things I'd like you to prepare for in the conversation. Number one, you should be able to explain what a fallacy in general is. It is the general notion of a fallacy. And it really, what is above there is, first of all, our course text's definition of a fallacy, which is very good. And then maybe being a little more precise about what a fallacy is, especially a formal fallacy. And that is, a fallacy is when you make an inference when that inference does not actually follow from the premises. So, a fallacy is when you make a claim in an argument, a conclusion that actually does not follow from the premises. This is the widest. So, yeah. So, you should be able to explain what a fallacy is. And then, two, you should be able to explain the difference between a formal fallacy and an informal fallacy. And to that end, I think would be good if you really should know the difference between two formal fallacies. One, uh, the difference between affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent. These are the two formal fallacies that we are introduced to. And of course, they both have to do with conditional statements or premises that contain additional statements. For instance, affirming the consequent. Uh, if P, then Q. That's just simply a conditional statement. So if we affirm the consequent is what comes after the then. If P is true, then Q is true. And then our second premise is Q is true. So the fallacy is then to conclude that P is true. And if you think about it, it is a fallacy. Let's just plug something in. If Jane gets an A on her test, she will have a good day. So getting an A on her test is the antecedent, and having a good day is the consequent. So if Jane gets an A on her test, she will have a good day. So if we affirm the consequence, Jane had a good day. Can we really conclude that she got an A on her test? No, we can't. Think about it. If Jane has a good day, but it may be because of other things that happened, right? That is, she might have had a good day because she won the lottery, or she, found an old friend that she thought was lost, or something like that. So, in a conditional statement, if P then Q, all we know is that if P is true, Q must be true, but it doesn't go the other way, right? That is, if Q is true, it's not saying that if Q is true, then P must be true. So it is actually a fallacy, and that is the fallacy of affirming a consequent. The other fallacy is denying the antecedent. Let's do it again. If P, then Q. Not Q. I'm sorry. That is another fallacy. To infer not Q from not P is actually a fallacy. That is, if P, excuse me, not if the P. If P, then Q tells us that if P is true, Q must be true. It doesn't say that if P isn't true, Q can't be true. So again, it's a fallacy, and we could do it. If Joe gets an A, he will be happy. So if Joe gets an A, he will be happy. So we then deny the antecedent. We say Joe does not get an A. And then we fallaciously conclude, so Joe will not be happy. So if Joe gets an A, he will be happy. That means that if indeed he gets the A, it must be true that he will be happy. It doesn't say that if he doesn't get an A, he won't be happy. He could be happy for other reasons. Again, maybe he looked up an old friend. So you should be familiar with these two forms of formal fallacy. And you should be able to, again, explain the difference between a formal fallacy and an informal one. Remember that a formal fallacy is fallacious due to its form. Right? The idea is that anything that follows this form or anything that follows this form has got to be a fallacy. It doesn't matter what's plugged in for P and Q. If it has that form, it will be a fallacy. A formal fallacy is fallacious due to its form. Now, an informal fallacy is different. It's a whole different animal, really. We need to understand the concepts involved. Let's take some informal fallacies like, right here, formal fallacies can be identified simply by their form. Informal fallacies require that we actually understand the content of the argument or the concepts that are being employed. For instance, take something like, what are some of the informal fallacies? There's a fallacy of composition, of division. Just top of my head, there are slippery slope fallacies. There are slippery slope fallacies. There is begging the question. What are some other ones? Informal fallacies. I'm trying to remember. There's the tu quoque fallacy. And what else? There's ad hominem. Let's take something like ad hominem. Or begging the question. Okay. You should always vote for the Green Party because it is always right to vote for the Green Party. What have I done there? I've said you should always vote for the Green Party because it's always right to vote for the Green Party. That is, what have I done there? I've assumed in the premises what I am actually supposed to be proving, for the conclusion. So something like begging the question is where you're engaging in circular reasoning, usually by just slightly changing the language, but essentially saying the same thing in the conclusion that you've already said in one of the premises. That's begging the question. Something like ad hominem is where in an argument, which is always basically boils down to it couldn't be right what Joe said because Joe said it, right? Like if somebody that you generally dislike or generally think is just an idiot comes up with an argument, and instead of actually criticizing their argument and showing why it's a bad argument, you attack them and said instead. Ad hominem in Latin means to the man. So the fallacy is that you're attacking the person, but you're not actually attacking the substance of their argument. And then another Latin one, tu quoque. Say that Jane gives us an argument about why it's really the worst political sin to lie. And she gives an argument about, how lying undermines trust in politics and about how it muddies the waters and how it has all these sort of bad effects. And then our response to her argument is, well, you lied, right? Tu quoque, I think, means you too. So there, it's really a version of the ad hominem, where instead of actually addressing somebody's argument, we say, well, you're guilty of the same thing that you're saying is wrong, or something like that, where it's you too. So why should we listen to your argument? Well, the argument might actually be very good, even if the person themselves is a liar or has lied, right? So the the fallacy of composition is a particularly clear one, right? He gives us these examples. Fallacy of composition is where we conclude that the whole has a certain quality because the parts do. He gives us the example of, the gymnastics team. Each member of the team weighs 110 pounds. Therefore, the team as a whole weighs 110 pounds. That, of course, is silly and is a fallacy just because each member of a team weighs 110 pounds. You can't conclude that the team as a whole weighs 110 pounds. But there are certain things where, he says, that is not a fallacy, right? If each part of a plane is made of plastic, then the plane as a whole, is made of plastic. So you can't determine that either one of these is a fallacy just by its form, because they have the same form. You determine that it's a fallacy because you understand the concepts involved. That is, that individual weight is not something that transfers to the whole, whereas each part of the plane being made out of plastic actually does imply that the whole plane is made up. So we have to understand the concepts, the vocabulary involved. So what you should be able to do for the final is, again, explain what a fallacy in general is. Being able to explain roughly what the difference is between a formal and an informal fallacy, and also be ready to discuss a few of the informal fallacies. You don't have to be able to explain them all, but be able to do what I did here. Take a look at just a few of them. Get a few of these, and I'm sure there are more, and be able to explain. What's the typical thing that goes wrong in a fallacy of this sort? A fallacy of division or composition, begging the question, ad hominem, things like that. So, again, you'll be prepared for the exam if you can explain what a fallacy in general is. roughly explain the difference between a formal fallacy and an informal fallacy, and be ready to discuss a few of the individual types of informal fallacies.